Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. We have reached the last episode of Season 2 of speaking about the Seforim and letters of R Chaim Kanievsky and how he wrote his Seforim. Fascinating. Go back and listen to over 30 episodes by now, dealing with R Chaim Kanievsky's Seforim and the manuscripts he used and the way he wrote his Seforim. We are here at the last episode, and we're going to discuss some of the letters that R Chaim Kanievsky wrote with her Rav Avigdor Neventzal Shlita, who is the Rav of the Old City in Yerushalayim, someone who Rabbi Brut has or had and continues to have a close relationship with. And he's going to discuss some of the letters that R Chaim had back and forth and some of the other letters that R Chaim wrote. And we hope this is going to be an interesting episode to close out, to make the siyum on all the episodes. And once again, this has been sponsored anonymously in memory of Moshe Chaim ben Reb Yitzchak David. May his neshama have an aliyah. We again thank the sponsor for sponsoring the whole season 2 of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. And without further ado, Rabbi Brut, how are you today?
Baruch Hashem. Okay, so we're going to continue, and this is reaching the conclusion of season 2. We're going to continue with what we began the past few episodes, discussing the letters of R Chaim Kanievsky, and that is, last episode we were discussing his letters, and we discussed the long relationship of through letters, through Reb Dov Landau, and now we're going to move on to another interesting correspondence that took place starting in the 1959, I believe it was. Okay, so there's 43 letters between Reb Avigdor Neventzal and Reb Chaim Kanievsky. And they began in about 1959, and Reb Avigdor Neventzal starts writing to Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Okay, so the age, just to put it in perspective, is like this. The age is, Reb Avigdor is about 24, and Reb Chaim is about 31. So they're both pretty young. This is before the internet, before emails, before smartphones, etc., etc. So one's living in Yerushalayim, that's Reb Avigdor, and Reb Chaim Kanievsky living in Bnei Brak. So what happens is they start writing. Fine. Recently, in 2015, they publish a book called Sefer HaMechtavim Tshuva Me'ahava. This is the letters between Reb Chaim Kanievsky and Reb Avigdor Neventzal. But like it tends to be today, they don't just put out the letters. They put out the letters, and then they're imid on mefarish kol tag shebetag of both Reb Avigdor Neventzal's questions and Reb Chaim Kanievsky's answers back and forth, pages and pages, and it turns into, like everything else in today's day and age, over close to 600-page book. Like now, these two giants, bucking Kol Torah Kula. When I say Kol Torah Kula, when we refer in Reb Chaim Kanievsky's world, this means starting with Yada and Nach, Targumim, Rambam, Bavli, Yerushalmi, etc., etc. So this is being like similar to with the letters of Reb Dov Landau, they're ping-ponging back and forth, both Reb Chaim Kanievsky and Reb Avigdor about this. Okay, so through these letters, they discuss all types of things, and each letter has, sometimes it could be 10 to 15 topics. Ha'aris, Reb Avigdor had, while he's learning, he would write it off to Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Reb Chaim Kanievsky enjoys these letters. These are not the point. One of the points is, these are not letters of Cain, Lo, Yafeh, or something like that.
Do you want to tell the audience where they may have known each other from?
I wish I knew. I don't know how they got to know each other. This is a great question. I don't know. I don't know the answer, but it seems they didn't meet personally. I don't know if they met personally already all the way back then. How they came to know each other, I don't know the backstory. I'm only able to say what I see from these letters mostly. Now, but the point is that if you open up before these letters come into the market, so to speak, the Kiryat Melech, which we spoke about in the first season, the first episode, which is the work on the Rambam, all the Makaris Rambam, already there, Reb Avigdor's name is prominently displayed, and Reb Chaim Kanievsky quotes him a bunch of times, and there's an early work of his. And now we're going to see part of what's going on. What happens is that Rabbi Avigdor is learning through Rambam, and he has all different types of questions, Makairis of Rambam, and all different things. Now, this is, again, before there's a Franco Rambam on the market and all these types of tools that we have today, easy to know, and we have a Kiryat Melech, we have that today. This is before that. So he's asking Rav Chaim Kanievsky, they're handling all different things with Rambams and Makairis of Rambam, and the Yeda and Chazal, these people playing with, it's obviously a different type of league than we could really relate to. Okay. But Kitzer, the way, what's fascinating is, so he begins calling Reb Chaim Kanievsky his Rebbe. He writes to him again and again, Moiri v'Rabbi Hagoyin Reb Chaim. Amazing titles. Now, he's a young, just to give a drop of background, Rabbi Avigdor is a Talmud Muvak of Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, but he's also affiliated with Amir. In one of these letters, he writes, I heard from Moiri v'Rabbi Hagoyin Reb Nachman Berchavitz. He's very, very close Talmud of Reb Chaim Shmulevitz. Kiyadua, his Mahalchim and his Shmuzin was heavily influenced Reb Chaim Shmulevitz. So he's a Mir, because he marries into the Mir family, the Mashkiach of Mir he marries into. So he's a Mir and Reb Shlomo Zalman creation, Reb Avigdor Neventzal, but he's a Yeki. That's where his father, etc., comes from. And so much so, to understand the level of being a Talmud with Reb Shlomo Zalman is that after 40 years of being a Talmud, he made a Suda. What's the Nakuda? The Nakuda is after 40 years, Chazal say you could be Oimid, Saif Daita of your Rebbe. And Reb Shlomo Zalman Taka came to this Suda even. Anyway, he's known as being one of the great Talmidim of Reb Shlomo Zalman. So interesting, this obviously plays out, relates to things we discussed in earlier episodes, Bnei Brak and Reb Chaim Kanievsky and Yerushalayim. I don't know. These are things I'll let others explore. Bottom line is they have this relationship that expands a bunch of years. Okay. So he's asking questions about the Rambam and other things, and he's calling him Meir v'Rabbi. So what's Reb Chaim Kanievsky's response to this? So right away, way back in the beginning, he says, he doesn't know, what are you doing calling me? He writes, he gives him a whole long answer about a certain thing they're handling, about 2 Reb Yirmiyahs, or there's 3 Reb Yirmiyahs, Chaim Kanievsky Kedarka throwing off all over Shas. Then he says, and what else you said in that letter, Einay maskim lehem klal. Whatever else you wrote in the letter, I'm not maskim. What's going on? So Baruch Hashem, we have the beer. What doesn't Reb Chaim Kanievsky like in the letter? The answer is because in the beginning of the letter he calls him Meir v'Rabbi. He doesn't like that. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky is basically telling him, don't call me Meir v'Rabbi. Okay, but this Seder keeps on going throughout the letters. So if we go further on, again, and Rabbi Avigdor constantly calls him L'chvoid Rabbi Umayri Hagoyin Hagadol. And then he ends off Elu Divrei Talmidoi Hamzavek Ba'afa Raglov. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky doesn't like this, but I guess eventually he just stops. At one point he writes, Sarachiyun, Yedidi Sheichid Eloi Chash, Ubikav Dash, Le'Isr Loig L'Rush, Ukvar Hiarti Pamal Kacha. I already, called you out on this. Please don't call me this. Anyway, this is amusing. They never thought these letters obviously being published. And at this age, I don't think they ever thought that they're both going to become the Gedolei Olam that they became. But this is cute in a way. You see this happen. Anyway, as I said, they're handling Rambams. Fine. We go further on into these letters. So at one point, it seems already the Kiryas Melech was out. So at one point, Reb Chaim Kanievsky says, Kinireh, you don't have my work. Says Reb Avigdor in the next letter, yeah, I don't. So then, basically, Reb Chaim Kanievsky eventually decides to send him the Sefer. Okay, great. And then from there, he starts having more ha'aris. And then he starts. So then Rabbi Avigdor writes, I got the Sefer, and I want to give you major shvach, but it's not derech eretz. I'm a small person, b'shvach hagadol, b'chulu. See, again, you see the play between these two people in back and forth going on. Fine. At one point later on, they get into another. They start talking about Brisa de Melechas HaMishkan, which ends up being a chibur, which we know Reb Chaim Kanievsky has a chibur, which we will deal with in the next season, Amir Tashem. But the point is, so he also ends up sending a copy to Rabbi Avigdor. So Rabbi Avigdor says, "What about payment?" So Reb Chaim Kanievsky says, "Payment. The ha'aris is payment." I mean, to say he encouraged the payment. At a certain point in time, there weren't letters. She's like, "What's going on? You're not sending me a letter. You're not sending me ha'aris." He goes, "I don't have time yet. As soon as I have more, I'll send you." I mean, to say this was not a please, it wasn't just like, okay, Rabbi Avigdor Neventzal needed to know Kain Loy in a Mishnah Berurah, and he was sending it on. He enjoyed these letters. This is a period of time. Reb Chaim Kanievsky is young, and as I said, this fits into back what I was saying earlier. This is a way how Gedolim they had. This is a letters and learning, so to speak. Okay. Anyway, there's a lot to see in these letters. We're not going to go through them. Don't worry. All the different aspects that one could see in these letters, but basically, Rabbi Avigdor is very, very happy. Again, still calling him Meir V'Rabbi. And he says, thank you so much on the Sefer you gave me, and I'm going to go through it, and I'm going to have Ha'aris. And he does send him many Ha'aris on the Sefer with the Rambam. Okay, but as I said, they didn't only just discuss Rambam. A lot of times it could be Ha'aris and Shas, a bunch of Gemaras, and then they'll handle back and forth. Fine. Now, one point, this was a cute thing. All of a sudden, I'm going through the letters, and I see Rabbi Avigdor writes to him some type of Ha'ara, and then he says, and his Ha'ara is, again, Rabbi Avigdor also writes very bekitzer. It's Yadua today. Rabbi Avigdor Neventzal also, they publish a lot of Teshuvos of Rabbi Avigdor Neventzal. They're also very identical to Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, Kain Lai, all these things. So he also writes he also has this ability of writing very bekitzer. So he writes a letter to Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, and in there he says, there's a Gemara in Yuma, Tanya, blah, blah, blah. It says in the Gemara, fine. Then he says, Ainli Esik ben Astaris, this is Rabbi Avigdor Neventzal, but maybe you could say that he's referring to Malchus Utferes and Malchus Liyasoid. Okay, say there. Now, obviously, I don't know anything about the Gemara and Yuma, I don't know anything, but Baruch Hashem, this, but thanks to the beer over here, I'm able to understand what's going on. In the next letter, Chaim Kanievsky says about what you said, Tema shekasa b'dvarim keilu. What are you doing writing me like these types of things? Again, I still don't know what's going on. All of a sudden, you go a little further, and you find out like this. It says, so Avigdor writes Barichus to explain what that one line that he wrote, what he meant. And basically, he starts varfing from some Zayars to him. And then he ends off with Bevade Mar Yedea Makaris Levarim Elu Makaris Rabbim Bezayar. So here we have the young Rabbi Avigdor, low 20s, and the young Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky in his low 30s handling a Zayar. Okay, fine. So he's basically, Rabbi Avigdor is clarifying what he meant in that one line thing. So then comes along Rabbi Chaim in the next letter and says like this. He begins, Yedidi Harav HaGoyin HaMetzuyin Charvu Bak Yisini V'Ikar Harim. Rabbi Avigdor. This is how Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky refers to Rabbi Avigdor. And remember, this is in his low 20s. Then he says, Yechayshish that I know these inyanim, avad I don't, and these are things. So basically, he's sort of like telling him off, don't handle these things. Now, mind you, you could always throw in, they're talking before they're 40, right? We know Kabbalah before 40. Okay, anyway, I have no idea if that's what's really going on. Or Chaim Kanievsky is pleading the fifth when it comes to knowledge in Kabbalah. Now, Zayar, he admits he knows because in his work, Kiryat Melech, he already pointed out, he does use the Zayar many times. That we'll get to discuss Chaim Kanievsky and Kabbalah at a later point. Okay, but this is just cute to see the back and forth. In these same letters, Rabbi Avigdor has another thing, a shtickle Torah that he says, and again, it seems Chaim Kanievsky wrote a reply, and he says, you want to say a pshat based, you're arguing on a meiri. And I already told you, it seems other times, don't argue Rishonim. What's going on over here? So again, Rabbi Avigdor is like, what's going on? What are you talking about? And Rabbi Avigdor writes here, again, a whole paragraph, because if you look through the other letters, they're basically a sentence or two. And he says like this, I don't know what you're talking about. Avada, I'm not, there's no, even when you're arguing, I'm not being machriya anything. Reshus v'chayvel kol echam Yisrael lulmoy atalma kulei leheven ha'amur boy vehein leheven lefize eich lifsek halacha ve'enach adam yachal lulmoy el b'seichel v'kli hanefesh shechana ha'bayri ve'enach leheven svaras kol rishonim machreinim v'af loy miktsasam. I can only say what I know. Beinim k'divrei misha kadmani, beinim einen kain. Vein kan siper begnusam shal Rishonim kamalacham. I'm chas v'shalom not saying anything against Rishonim. Elohim raku many vein kamachlokes chas v'shalom. But he says, if I made a mistake or something, I accept your musar, your teichacha, no problem. So basically, he was trying to say something, and maybe like kilu lule harishainim or lule mustafino. That's the expression. Okay. Anyway, then the next letter, Reb Chaim Kanievsky responds back to him and he says like this: basically, Reb Chaim Kanievsky held that you have to write. He says, not to say in the lashon you wrote. Okay, but he says like this. Reb Chaim says, "Im hikbid al zeh," means say if you, Rabbi Avigdor, are being makbid about what I said, "Yim chali ki chalil livchoy bekvoy tam chacham v'gava rabba the kavasi k'moyse yarb Yisrael." Chas v'shalom, if you are, if I caused any problems. Okay. Later on, again, Rabbi Avigdor says, So then the next letter Avigdor goes back. Okay, then he says, "What you're asking me, mechila, chas shalom, ain't no tzarich levakish mechila." And okay, then he goes on. Okay, then he goes, "Thanks for sending me the Bryce and Lechas Mishkan." And then Reb Chaim Kanievsky in the letter writes back, "That's it. You answer the letters of the Bryce and Lechas Mishkan. It's more than enough." Okay. Anyway, the point is, through these letters, one could see. I'm pulling out how the yachas of these two young people had an amazing yachas with each other. And if you look through the letters, mamish on dozens and dozens of areas in Kol Kula, very, very impressive stuff. Now, interestingly enough, this could even be the Unum in a Mishnah Brura and a thing from the Chazanish that he heard, all types of things, fine. Just to be Messiah, one last prat with this is that interesting is there's a 2-volume work that was put out mamish less than 5 years ago called Igros Uksavim, which we'll discuss more in a few minutes. But there they have a bunch of letters real letters that people wrote to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, or Reb Chaim Kanievsky wrote to people. Not the Cain or Lo answers or that type of stuff, which we'll also deal with shortly. And they have some of these letters, but they don't say that it's with Rabbi Avigdor Neventzal. So first of all, you don't have the letter that Rabbi Avigdor Neventzal wrote to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, so you don't even understand the context a lot of times. And for some reason, they dot out the name. And it's funny because 5 years earlier, this already was published. So the public already should know about the Teshuvos Me'ahava behind the letters of Rabbi Avigdor Neventzal. So I don't even know what some type of censorship that's being done here. What is even the point of it? Okay, anyway, they didn't ask me, and we move on. Okay. But the point is, besides showing the tremendous chiba that these two gedolim had at a young age, as a correspondence, we see that Reb Chaim Kanievsky was in contact with other people of his generation, close to his age, talking and learning, writing and learning, and he didn't always write Kain or Lo or Ulai, or when you get into Bnei Brak, come visit me and we'll discuss it. Okay. Is there any other such thing? So there are more. I don't know all of them, but another one that I recently came across was that Tzitz Eliezer had a son. His name was Reb Simcha ben Waldenberg. He was the Rav of Ezra's Torah, and he also had a correspondence back in the late. It started in the late 60s with Reb Chaim Kanievsky. At that time, Reb Chaim Kanievsky was working on the Shaina Halachas and publishing it. So he wrote intense ha'aris mamish. It's very interesting to see. Be'iyun ha'aris on handling different things in the Shana Halachas and things about the Chazanish Pesakim, Mishnah Brura Pesakim. Bechlal, this sefer that they published called Bina Simcha of Reb Simcha is very, very, very be'iyun into the Mishnah Brura, and it's only on the first 2 volumes of Mishnah Brura. It says Chelik Aleph, so Mir Hashem, I hope that it'll continue. But the point is, here they have 7 letters. They published 7 letters, but there are more that are going to be published soon. And again, here we have him talking and learning with Reb Chaim Kanievsky, long letters, and Reb Chaim Kanievsky answering him. Sometimes he writes 2 words, 3 words, nice ha'ara, but sometimes he really answers him. Just to mention just one yediyah, again, we could pull out many, and some of them we will get to at a later point in time. Just to pull out one interesting thing is that it's known that are you allowed to learn with in front of a lamp on Leil Shabbos? So for the Bnei Brakers and all these types of people, there's an issue of, forget about Bnei Brakers, we know, stated ready from the Gemara, Ein Kairim B'Sefer La'ar Haner, because you might do Shamayata. So it's an interesting Bir Halacha, it's a known Bir Halacha. The Bir Halacha says, V'shamati al Anshe Maisa, Shekaisen al Chatichas Ner, Ba'Isis Gedoyloi Shabbos Hayoim, V'Asr Lahadik, Umadbikin B'Moed Yoim Hanir B'Makam, that it's basically you have like similar to what a blech does. You have this for your lamp, so to speak. So this is a Mishnah Brura and Bir Halacha Siman Reish Ayin Hey. He says Shamati al Anshe Maisa. So this is always a trivia for me. Very interesting to know who is this Anshe Maisa? Who's referring to? So it turns out Reb Simcha Waldenberg asked Reb Chaim Kanievsky, "Do you know who it is?" And he says, "Did you hear if it's referring to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter?" So Reb Chaim Kanievsky answers him in the next letter. It is Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. And how do we know this? So Reb Chaim Kanievsky says, because his son in his sefer says that his Rabbi Yisrael Salanter came up on this, but Lamaisa, it sounds like the Chazanish was machmir and did not like this thing. What's he referring to? So it's a sefer Chai Aryeh, Gevaldika sefer, from the son of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. So there in the beginning of the sefer, Simon Beis, we find such a thing that Rabbi Yisrael, he brings down, my father, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, had such a heter that you put a piece of paper, and then that's good enough to keep in mind that not to worry about shamayata, that you're going to move in there. Okay, this is just Tama Yediyah that comes up in this letter. They're handling, do you know? And R Chaim says, yes, I know, and he gives him the Marmak. Fine, moving on. So now we refer to. So basically, so far I've showed that with Rabbi Landau, with Rabbi Neventzal, even this Rabbi Simcha Waldenberg, there's longer letters. Are there other longer letters? So the answer is there is two volumes I came across a few years ago called Igros Uksavim that was published by someone in Bnei Brak in 2020. And this fellow collected from tons of places, and it's a shame a lot of times he doesn't tell you who the person he's taking the letter from, but real letters of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Someone wrote a sefer I came across in here. Someone wrote a sefer in 1960 or something. Reb Chaim writes him a whole 2-page letter, ha'aris on the sefer. I read your sefer, Gavaldik sefer. Here's a ha'ara, here's a ha'ara, here's a ha'ara. Not even the guy didn't even write to Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Reb Chaim Kanievsky reached out to him. And there are many such letters in here. Interestingly enough, there's also a massive collection of about 50 letters between him and Reb Elyashiv. Real letters, not like one line or something, in all different areas. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky did write real letters. That's the point I'm trying to bring out is, besides for what we're about to discuss and what Reb Chaim Kanievsky is famous and goes on auctions, the Gaon and the Lois and all these types of things, Reb Chaim Kanievsky wrote real letters, and sometimes even not that people wrote to him, or people that wrote him, he encouraged it, and these are ways of him talking about it. Fine, moving on. Lamaisa, he wrote these letters, and at a certain point in time, so in 2009, it seems the son of Reb Chaim Kanievsky writes in the Daas Noteh that there's over 70,000 letters copied in Reb Chaim Kanievsky's archives. Now, it's unclear if this is all the letters he really wrote. They don't give you all the details. And you say it could be Reb Chaim Kanievsky didn't keep copies of everything, but they have, this is already in 2009, over 70,000 letters of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Now, in a letter, there could be, it's also unfair because a letter could have 10, 15 questions, which are many of the letters. Okay. So now the problem is that over the years, and people pointed this out, Reb Chaim Kanievsky never published his letters. Now, he kept them for whatever reason. We don't know. I'm not sure what his reason was, but there's tons of letters out there. So first, became a whole industry.
Can you just tell the audience how to keep them? He was making photocopies. Someone was writing them down.
Sounds like he was keeping somehow photocopies of them. That's what it sounds like. And this is actually an interesting thing because throughout the generations, Gedolim that wrote Teshuvos, what's pshat? They would say, give me back my Teshuva afterwards. So it seems that there was such a thing that a lot of times a Gadol would have a professional cipher that would copy for him. Or we find, I mentioned this actually, I think in the episode with Rebelli Gutmacher, he said one time he was in such a rush to answer, he says, I don't have my regular cipher here, make sure to please send me back this copy because I need to have the copy. I mean, say certain Gedolim were very makbid to keep archives of their information. Other Gedolim, they didn't. Lamashal, we have the Aruch HaShulchan. It seems he wrote thousands of letters. Most of it was not kept because he didn't keep it. His focus was more on his Sefer Aruch HaShulchan, not on his Teshuvos. But other Gedolim, they did. So there was this thing. So Chaim Kanievsky, it seems, even though these weren't long tyrus and stuff like that, but he kept them. He kept some form of a copy of these letters. Now, but the problem is that over the years, and there's lists of the amount of Seforim, I don't even know if there's yet a full list of how many Seforim the Mechaber writes into Reb Chaim Kanievsky, 25 questions, 50 questions, and it will say in the Shar, Reb Chaim Kanievsky gave me these Teshuvos, he said I could publish them, but okay. Not only that, then Seforim, then a whole industry of booklets started to come out like everything else, and then not only that, it went even further, a whole Seforim came out where the author would say, these are the 100 letters I wrote to Reb Chaim Kanievsky over a period of 10 years, and then the author would go ahead and be mefarish what he meant and what Chaim Kanievsky meant, and this became a whole industry, and there's a whole market of these type of Seforim out there with Chaim Kanievsky. Even the pictures of Chaim Kanievsky's Seforim in his house, some of them it seems he kept. He had them displayed in his shelf near his Seforim of these are the Seforim, whatever. Let's say Rav Taplin in Lakewood there's a few volumes of his Teshuvos Matam back and forth with Chaim Kanievsky with massive horrors on the bottom. Okay. So the problem is, if you write letters on Kol Torah Kula over a period of, 50, 60 years, we're talking about thousands and thousands, is it possible that there could be a stira? Is it possible that you could change your mind? So, interestingly enough, there's a Yid Ramosha Gerlitz, so he wrote in 2011, this guy seems to be holding in all Reb Chaim Kanievsky's farm, and he wrote Ha'aris, where, let's say, if Reb Chaim Kanievsky in a piece in Time Dekra, where he already talks about in Derech Hamuna, so he'll write in his Ha'aris on Time Dekra, but look, in Derech Hamuna, there's another Nakuda relating to this thing. And this guy put out almost a 130-page collection of Ha'aris, basically cross-referencing Reb Chaim Kanievsky through all his writings. And he had a close relationship with Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and you could see this because Reb Chaim Kanievsky gives him unpublished material also. But anyway, Reb Chaim Kanievsky writes a letter in the Hagdama to this Sefer in 2011. And what was the question? The question was like this. Masha Matza Pamim Stiris. Basically, you found stiris in what I said. This is Reb Chaim Kanievsky writing. There's stiris. Stiris Matzi Eitz Kol Hamachabrim. Ukashakazafti Zet, Loy Zacharti Shakatzafti B'Makam Afer Lehefach. That I said something else. I don't remember everything I wrote. And we're talking about even Reb Chaim Kanievsky, 70,000 letters plus. The whole Pam Kasafti Mashinir Keis at that time. Then the Reb Chaim Kanievsky goes even further. Gam b'Sefer Chazanish Matzanu Stirois. Ubechol Sifri Agadoyle Vatam Kanal V'Yasher Kaychacha Ala Sefer V'Yaratzin Shila Teal. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky, first and foremost, is admitting that there's possibility to find stiris. He wrote so much, he changes his mind. That doesn't mean that he's gonna change his mind every day and such a thing. No, but it's possible. He's definitely admitting it could be in one place in a Sefer he wrote like this, another place like that. Fine. And he's also encouraging this fellow to publish his Ha'aris, which is cross-referencing all over this farm. Fine. Now the Sun, the problem is, it became a whole industry. Thousands and thousands of teshuvos are being published, and there's theorists, and there's whole books being written about it. So the Sun realizes this could cause problems. So they realized Reb Chaim Kanievsky never met, when a guy wrote him a letter, this is even according to the Torah that I said in earlier things, if Reb Chaim Kanievsky meant halacha l'maisa, and he said, even though he says it's not halacha l'maisa, in many of the cases it's pashut. He thought he's answering a guy, a bacher, asked him a simple question. He's not, it didn't mean that this is now going to become a sayur for Gans Klal Yisrael to do kach v'kach. So Bekitzer, there's a problem. What do you do? Daas Noteh. What do you do? There's so many letters. So, Kitzer, Reb Chaim Kanievsky's son says we have to gather all the letters, and he seems he has all long conversations with Reb Chaim Kanievsky about it, what to do. And Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and they decide they're going to make a machon, and they got funding to do this. They're going to put out all the teshuvos that they have in the archives of Reb Chaim Kanievsky, al pi the Seder HaShulchan Aruch. Gewaldig. And they're going to organize it. So they'll go through it very carefully to see taka that it shouldn't be stiris. And if there's a question, they'll come into Reb Chaim Kanievsky to talk to him about it and say, what's your safe das? And you say they'll learn the sugyas, and then they'll see how it works out with Reb Chaim Kanievsky. They'll say, oh, Reb Chaim, you wrote about it over here, or this, how does it work out with this? And then he'll be able to avoid stiris, so to speak, and stuff like that. And this will be the authoritative work of Reb Chaim Kanievsky instead of every single edition that's out there. Fine. And Reb Chaim Kanievsky seems to agree with it. He also gives a michtav, a very nice letter, and he talks about this. And he says, I didn't mean, because basically he doesn't want a takala to come out. And this is fine. And basically, this is what the Sun writes by Richos, that they create such a machon. And Arayim, they've published many such volumes, and we'll get to discussing one of them at a later point in time with Hilchos Mezuzah. But today, they have on Chumash, they're also doing this, and someone seems to be funding this whole major project. And what the tayalis of all this is to avoid the stiris also. Now, obviously, we don't have Reb Chaim Kanievsky alive anymore, so how do they deal with it? Maybe he set up certain things, certain hagdarim to figure out what's what, because up till now they had him when they were working on it. Okay, I don't know the answer to that question. Fine. Moving on. But the point is, they're taking the letters and they're making it user-friendly instead of having them all over the place. Also, api the Seder HaShulchan Aruch, api Chumash, etc., etc. Fine. Other people that wrote letters, we've quoted him many times in the past, this Rav Tiger. Rav Tiger was zeicha to have a very close relationship with Reb Chaim Kanievsky, and he ended up becoming a sort of an editor for Reb Chaim Kanievsky. He read through all his stuff, and Reb Chaim Kanievsky had tremendous hakaras hatov, and because of that, Reb Chaim Kanievsky gave him a lot of time, and a lot of these videos have been coming out in the past, even already while Reb Chaim was alive, and He also published a work called R Chaim, which has hundreds of ha'aris that he wrote to R Chaim Kanievsky throughout his going as he was learning through Derech Hamuna. But he also asked them regular questions, and sometimes R Chaim Kanievsky over there also will have a longer answer. Lamashal, he asked him something which we discussed already in the first season about the steers in the Mishnah Brura. Is it the son who wrote also? And R Chaim Kanievsky said no. There's ways to answer it, but in these volumes of Lamashal R Chaim from this Rav Tigger, there's also real meat, so to speak. So, bottom line is that there's endless materials of Reb Chaim in these letters. There are places that Reb Chaim Kanievsky had real correspondences with the people. A lot of this has been collected in this set called Igros Uksavim, and then there were also Gedolim that he had, and regular people that he had long types of correspondence with us. Okay, now just to mention just 2-3 other Nakudas, and that's it for now. And that's as follows. Number one, Reb Chaim Kanievsky writes very short. So there's a potential danger with this, because what happens is he doesn't usually, when he got all these questions, he was trying to answer as many as he could. He doesn't necessarily back up why did he reach certain psukim of his. So now in the Daas Noteh, they're trying to fix that up. They're going to give a lot of them a kairos for it. So interestingly enough, this is a very hot topic that really needs a lot of clarification. Certain gedolim, there's a certain thing in Pesak halacha. Even today, you'll call up certain rabbanim and they say a Pesak, but they don't. But you're asking them a question and they don't want to even give you their reason. You want to talk to me in learning? Set up. We'll have a different conversation. You're asking me now halacha l'maisa. This is halacha l'maisa. This is my Pesak. But when Gedolim had correspondences with each other, there were certain times that certain Gedolim would say, I have a Kabbalah and I don't want to get involved. And other Gedolim were like, no, you have to back yourself up. And this came out in numerous times. We're getting close to Pesak. So in the machine matzah controversy, in one of the aspects of the machlokes between the Shalom Meshiv and the Tzanzarav, so the Tzanzarav didn't want to say, he says he had a Tam Kamus, and there's a lot of Diyai spilled on this, what it was. But basically, the Shalom Meshiv says, no, you have to say a Pesak. You tell me your reasoning, and then I'll analyze it if I hear where it's coming from. You can't hide behind the Tam Kamus. And it seems other times also the Shalom Meshiv wrote in a different tshuva with, I think, another machlokes he had, is that's how halacha is. You have to give the reasons, and then people could handle and say, if I agree with it. And we find, we mentioned this very briefly in halacha l'maisa. A lot of these poskim said, I'm not writing halacha l'maisa, but here's my reason. And the nakuda that they said was, you don't have to listen to me. I'm going to give you my take on the sugya. You'll analyze the sugya and you'll decide if it's good. Anyway, this is some type of a complaint with Reb Chaim Kanievsky, but it's not really a complaint, because the point is, Reb Chaim Kanievsky, he was just answering a question to a guy. He never thought it was going to come into this whole massive industry. Another nakuda is that there's an aspect Reb Chaim Kanievsky is of writing bekitzer, and this is a great topic. Barichus, we're not going to go into now, but just to mention 2 yediyos. If one wants to see a collection of all about the galus of writing bekitzer, already starts from the Gemara in Pesachim. For those that already maybe starting Pesachim, Lekavid Pesak, they're deep into it from already Purim time. So state lo'olim yishana adam l'talmidav derech tzara. So Lamashal in the Chibur, the incredible Chibur Maisa Ephai, the Rav Yitzchak Duran. So in the beginning of his Diktuk Sefer, he has a whole fascinating section about all different things. A fascinating introduction. Over there, he talks about the Maila of Kitzer, which basically it causes you to focus very carefully into Medayik and the Lashonis, and etc. So Professor Yaakov Spiegel in his book Amudim B'Toldos Sefer Ivri, the volume called Talmud Aruch, he has a whole arichos, 3 massive chapters about the Maila of writing Bekitzer. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky, there's a certain we find and that there is some type of Maila of writing Dafka Bekitzer. And Reb Chaim Kanievsky also, he's trying to answer as many questions. It wasn't about creating a tshuva sefer that he was going to publish. Ve'araya, he didn't publish it all the years. Only after everything, then the Daas Noteh came out after it became a whole industry. But we know there is a Mayurdik Maila of writing Bekitzer, and certain Gedolim were blessed, most notably Rashi was famous for how much he was able to pack into such a small amount of words that no one was able to duplicate this method that he had. Okay, fine. That's another aspect I want to discuss. And then the last 2 aspects is as follows. Number 1, we already addressed that there's a possibility that there are that he was chayzer, or there could be steers. So what's the story with such a thing? But more than that, let's say someone's learning Reb Chaim Kanievsky's sefer, Daas Noteh, and he sees Reb Chaim Kanievsky says kach v'kach, but then he opens up whether it's Shaina Loches or Masechtas Tefillin, and he sees Reb Chaim Kanievsky says differently elsewhere. So there's a stira between the Tshuva Sefer, quote unquote, Reb Chaim Kanievsky called Daas Noteh, and the Sefer that Reb Chaim Kanievsky wrote, let's say Masechtas Tefillin, which is a halacha sefer, so to speak. What do you do? So this is an old question, which is whenever there's a stira between Paiskim, when a Pesak who wrote a sefer of Pesak, and he also wrote a sefer of Teshuvos, Lamashal the Rush. We know the Rush wrote Teshuvos, and he also wrote Pesakim. What do you do when there's a stira between the two? Or which one do you paskin like? So Rabbi Yitzchak Kahanan in the Sefer Mechker Mesafra Teshuvot, he collects a whole lot of information about it. And just to mention one Maramakim, and then to play it back to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, the Netziv, we've quoted this tshuva in the past, and this was a tshuva that he was asked about. The Bamberger family want to know if they should publish their father's tshuvas. Okay, it seems the father was a great Gaon who wrote numerous Seforim, the Würzburger Rav, and he held it not halacha l'maisa. So the family members, they were also tremendous Talmid Chachamim and Rabbanim in their own right. They wanted to know if they should publish the material, so they wrote to Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan and to the Netziv. And the Netziv, and in the discussion, they handled about the stira between Rush. What do you do if you have a stira in the Rush in his Teshuvos versus Sefer of Pesakim? Which do you give more weight to, so to speak? Anyway, the bottom line is that the Netziv says like this, that there's a Meir de Kasiyata de Shmaya when a Rav writes a Tshuva Sefer, because the question is in front of him. So that Siyata Shmaya makes it that it's more powerful than a Pesak Sefer. And the Netziv goes with this, and in one of the this is a Tshuva that ends up being published in Meishav Davar, and the Meishav Davar doesn't give the exact background, what's the story, but today we know from numerous sources that it's going with the Würzburger family, and the Sefer Ginzei Shari Tzion, the Bamberger family published there for the first time, but now it's, I think, in other places, and it seems there might be differences between the Teshuvos Meishav Davar, and here they have a few more lines, but the Netziv held, once someone's Mechadish Torah, it's not his. Basically, you have no control over it, and it's not yours, and you can't lock it down and say that it can't get out to other people. And then he says, we find other Gedolim, the Torahs were lost. He says, no, Hashem Yisbarach makes it certain things. They're not Zeichim Hashemayim that the Torah should get their material. He tells through the Gemara, Harben Avim Lo Yizachu Shenemer Nuyasan LeDoros V'chein Kama Tanoi V'Maram Shelo Yizachu Shinikra B'Mishnah U'Gemara Mishmam. However, if you're plenty of people, they do, and sometimes it could be a whole story how they discover the Teshuvos hundreds of years later, and it becomes a whole fascinating story how it happens. But bottom line is you have a stira between a Teshuva Sefer and a Pesak Sefer. You go according to the Teshuva Sefer. So now we can ask a question, but what about Reb Chaim Kanievsky? He didn't look at this as a Teshuva Sefer. He's writing a Teshuva Sefer. This was a kid. A lot of times it's a kid asking Reb Chaim Kanievsky, is a Mishnah Berurah Shaila. So is the Daas Noteh a Tshuva Sefer in the full force? So I would speculate that Reb Chaim Kanievsky definitely did not hold that it's a Tshuva Sefer that would use, if we would be using the words of the Netziv, that if there's a stira between the two, that you would go like the Teshuvos. I think Reb Chaim Kanievsky would say you go Basar my Derech Emunah, and my other Seforim where that was written more with a thing. But again, Reb Chaim Kanievsky held the Shitas of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. It's not negay, because either way you shouldn't be relying on him, because he held it's not halacha l'maisa, whatever he writes. Okay, now to Messiah with the last Nakuda relating to the Teshuvos that I would like to bring out is, we see from Chaim Kanievsky, it's not only that he was asked questions in where Chazals and Gemara and Open Mishnah Berurah type questions. Also, he was literally asked all types of questions on Kol Torah Kula. Now, L'dogma, a guy who was working on a sefer about the Big Day Kahuna, massive work. Who does he ask all his beaten dika questions? Sends off a whole bunch of letters to Chaim Kanievsky, who answers him. Same fellow was working on a sefer on the Mishkan. Same thing, a bunch of questions in Mishkan, Chaim Kanievsky. All types of things. We mean to say these are not the word tshuva, but they're klal. Again, there's always exceptions to klal. Tshuva says it was a halacha l'maisa question. When you open up most tshuva Seforim, there's not hashkafa questions, there's not questions in a chumash. There are, but not too much. Is there anyone that is a dimion between this and Chaim Kanievsky? So I would say there was, and that is the Rogatchover. The Rogatchover, who, interestingly enough, according to Pinchas Tights, he answered over between 40 to 50,000 teshuvos. Interestingly, they're being published today still. 5 volumes. A fellow from Kiryat Sefer has been publishing them, and he's trying to collect more. And it seems there's manuscripts and stuff survived, and there's Maifa stories how some of the stuff survived. But the point is, the Rogatchover also answered questions of all types, not only halacha l'maisa type of questions. People would ask him, and he even had, similar to what I mentioned with Rabbi Landa, with Rabbi Neventzal, he had a correspondence back and forth with the Yid Rav Mordechai Kalina in learning. And it's incredible to read these letters. You can't even tell who's the Rogatchover and who's this Rav Mordechai, because they're so similar in the way they talk. Going through Kol HaTorah Kula, someone recently published part of them with a whole fancy edition, like always happens today. But the point is, the Rogatchover also was a Yid that was he held was very important. He literally answered questions from everyone on all types of topics. Keseder. Interestingly enough, the Rogatchover, besides that, the R Chaim quotes the Rogatchover a lot of times. In this set of Seforim that I quoted, called Igur Siksavim, it seems at one point, I don't know the details of this either, but Reb Chaim Kanievsky was hired to work on Ksavim with the Rogatchover, and he wrote notes, critical, whatever, like Ha'ar's footnotes, B'yindika footnotes on 9 different tshuvas of the Rogatchover, because everyone knows, if you don't, then you could find out more about this. The Rogatchover writes, also similar to Reb Chaim Kanievsky, Gemara here, you ask him a question, he says, Ein Gemara, a long list of Gemaras, and then a Mechilta. And you're like, what? How did he answer the question? So you have to go learn the Makairis, and then all of a sudden it could be it's a whole art to understand it. And not only is it a whole art, many years ago, Menachem Kasher was involved. He formed a Mechon to be Mefarish called Tag Shabbatag of the Rogatchover. My grandfather, Rabbi Leib Spitz, was a Talmud of the Rogatchover. Was very close with him. He knew how to understand the Rogatchover very well. He worked at least a little bit with this Mechon also. And other people, Reb Zevin, if you ever read, you want to understand the Rogatchover. Everyone hears the Rogatchover is this Eloi Mishunadik. He's just barfing a bunch of Gemaras. How do you understand it? So you open up, Isham Veshitas has an incredible section on the Rogatchover. He also knew the Rogatchover well, and he shows you how to decipher the Rogatchover, and it's an art. So Chaim Kanievsky also, Ish of Yedei Kol HaTorah Kula, he understood how to read the Rogatchover because he also had Kol HaTorah Kula. So in these tshuvas, he writes in his footnotes to decipher it. But it's a big thing today. I don't know who learns it, but there's many materials of the Rogatchover coming out of Yoim with these type of footnotes. So all I'm saying is, Chaim Kanievsky had this nakuda similar to the Rogatchover, which was answering all different types of questions. And also interesting, the Chazon Ish also did correspond a little bit with the Rogatchover also, so maybe that also had to give him some type of chashivas for Chaim Kanievsky, who knows. Anyway, these are just some of the ha'aras of the many ha'aras that one could comment about the various basically the industry that has arose over the years while Chaim Kanievsky was alive, of all these letters. They're basically supporting many auction houses now. We've actually quoted a few cute ones a few episodes back. And these are just some of the many different things that one could discuss when we talk about the letters and the writings of Chaim Kanievsky of this type of stuff. The letters and the tshuvas of Chaim Kanievsky. We will discuss a little bit in some other episodes, but this is just some of the points. As I say, in L'Davar Saif, V'lo Elecha Amlacha Ligmar, in this prat of Reb Chaim Kanievsky.
Beautiful. Tam v'nishlam. Hadron Alach. Season 2 of Reb Chaim Kanievsky. Thank you very much. Fascinating episode. And we're looking forward to perhaps a season 3.